Have with us Sri Jinan KB, who is a design guru and researcher. Education is his key interest. So let's talk to him about de-academizing knowledge and de-institutionalizing learning. This is something which he has been talking about. And sir, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, actually, you see, it was actually during my engineering days I realized that nobody's actually learning, nobody's actually deeply involved in any education, in learning, and I found that everybody's learning. I mean, getting into education only to get some marks and get a job. So there is no commitment to knowledge. There is no involvement in knowledge. It's just that we are whiling away time, sometimes getting good marks or whatever, no, and then getting a job. And I found that the same problem also with the teachers. They are well-meaning people, but they are also not deeply committed to knowledge. Just that they have read some things, or they have been forced to read some things, out because of which they got a degree, and what they know, which is a static idea of knowledge, which is being given to us. But you see, when I looked at this, I found that there is some fundamental problem with this whole idea of knowledge distribution that is happening in the modern society. You see, I believe that knowledge is something to be created individually by each and every one of us, because we are biologically equipped to create knowledge. But our notion about the whole, this whole process changed because we started relying on ready-made knowledge written in text, written in the form of book. So this is a very new notion after the printing press came in, that you can actually transfer knowledge through language. Otherwise, you see, I have been living with rural tribal people, illiterate people, and my basic statement I make is that literates learn the word and illiterates learn the world. Now this puts a very important question: that are we biologically equipped to, aren't we equipped to create knowledge of the real world? And why are we wasting time on reading a description of the world? You see, so that is what I began to really deeply look into. And there are two areas of my fundamental research. One is that what is the biological process by which we create knowledge, and how modern education, with its literacy, with its whole modern paradigm, completely destroys our cognitive faculty, which is actually for creating knowledge, not for analyzing somebody's information. And we are celebrating that stupidity, actually, thinking that that is knowledge. It is written by somebody, it can go wrong any day.
Okay. So, sir, how is design coming in this? Say your understanding about education and say how it has to uh, move ahead with the design. So, how you
No.
are indulging it to the design?
Yeah. You see, the issue is that after engineering, I had decided never to work, this 9 to 5 business and nothing. I also decided not to do anything that I don't like to do. So to while away time, I got into post-graduation in design at NID, National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. I wasn't taking it very seriously when I applied and all that. I thought next 3 years I can live on stipend and not worry about some job. But when I went there, the whole scenario changed, because I found that design education is actually fundamentally different from all other kinds of education, engineering, or whether it's IIT or any place. The fundamental difference is that at NID, actual learning is taking place, in the sense that students are actually involved in creation of knowledge. So I find these two paradigms very different. The engineering or the regular education paradigm and design education paradigm. In design education, there is nobody teaching. No student ever attend classes because of attendance, because there is no attendance at all. There is no examination. So the whole paradigm is very different. The teachers are not involved in teaching. They're all involved in exploring something of their interest. Now, this is something that is unheard of in other education institutions. Very rarely you meet any professor who is actually involved in learning on their own. Nothing to do with teaching somebody. So this is, I found it's a very, very important space. So I began to study not design per se, but what is the difference between this learning paradigm and teaching paradigm. So I began to get interested in this whole software of the hardware and software of what constitutes a learning environment. A learning environment to me means creation of knowledge. It is not mugging up what somebody else is telling you. That is not learning. That's a misunderstanding, because we have to have that word somewhere. So we say teaching and learning together. Whereas I believe that when there is teaching, learning cannot take place. Learning is an independent activity like breathing. That it's not a choice also, because we have senses. We are constantly learning. So I think that very, very important lessons can be learned from the whole premise of design education, not the content, but how it is taught, how the place is organized, and what kind of timetable do you have. So everything is so different in a design school. One or two examples I'll tell you. One is that in regular education, we have 45 minutes, 1 hour, duration of one subject, then go into another subject. So it goes on like that, So by the time you get involved in some interest in one subject, immediately that is over and you take the other subject. And then you erase your brain ready for the next one, After 1 hour, you erase it again. And so this is a very, very wrong way to, right from school, this should be changed completely. So in design education, that suppose we have photography, then next 2 weeks is photography. There's nothing else. So a student gets enough time to really get involved in it, do a lot of deeper studies, So the whole paradigm is so fundamentally different that I think if modern people don't reimagine their education based on two things. One is that how we are naturally equipped to create knowledge, and the other one, of course, you can use the design education pedagogy, not what is happening right now. Right now, even design education has now become very mediocre and it has also become like the other institutions where, there is test is there, children have stress, examination, test, all this kind of nonsense have crept into design also now. In my time, there was no exam at all. So there was a very, very different kind of involvement. No stress at all, but everybody is involved in learning, So that is what I'm talking about. It's not design education per se, but the software and hardware of design education has a lot to offer for reimagining our whole education paradigm, actually.
Yes. So being is beauty and Panima, which is again you are experimenting on. Can you please tell us more about this? Panima?
Yeah. You see, the whole problem at NID, what I found was that even though they have created an environment of freedom, you are free to become a Westerner, in the sense that the paradigmic border is created by Western aesthetics and Western design process. So what happens is that in our aesthetic sense is completely colonized and we become Western aesthetic sense, So the issue that we need to look at is that when we talk about decolonization, if you look at the whole decolonization movement in the modern era, we are only talking about changing knowledge. We have never addressed aesthetics as a thing to be addressed at all. I never heard any decolonization people involved in understanding aesthetics. So I actually began to look at 3 pillars of a culture. Every culture is formed by 3 pillars. Number 1, what is the context? How the context defines its knowledge. What kind of knowledge is required is contextual. Meaning culture is contextual actually. When you say this is the culture of that place, what does it actually mean? Today people think it is song and dance. No, it is number 1, the knowledge that is created in that particular context. Second is that context also defines what are the value system that is demanded of that particular context. How to live in a certain context. If there is no water, how do you preserve water? Suppose there is more trees, how do you ensure that it is still there? So ethical context is actually again defined by the local context, how to live there. And the third one is that how do you apply this knowledge? And that how is actually the defining factor which awakens our aesthetic sense. So beauty, knowledge, and value are the three fundamental pillars of a culture. Now, all the three has been completely forgotten in the modern era, where they are continuously being bombarded by the Western knowledge system, and we are all happy with it everywhere, all over the world. So I began to explore how do you, what is beauty, and how do you address that, with so as I began to live in rural tribal people, I found that that there is no teaching of sorts, yet they are able to create something beautiful. Because there is no formal training at all. But if you see that, you go to any place, why is that everybody has their own particular architectural style? Why is Kerala has one style, Tamil Nadu has another style, but there is no teaching at all? Which means that there is something contextual about beauty, and at the same time, there is also something biological about beauty. That beauty is not an intellectual mind's response, but the body's need to harmonize with its surroundings. So I also then began to explore beauty. It's almost 30 years of my research. And I also began to work with craftsmen without any kind of teaching. So I was able to initiate a certain process in the artisan without any teaching. And I found that they were able to retain their originality and authenticity very much. That is when I began to, I again went back to the education institutions like architectural education and design education, and started attempting to see how do we address the development of aesthetic sense without any teaching. So, but I failed actually, because see, everybody is so colonized that they don't want, and everybody is getting their salary, So why should they ever worry about anything more than that, So it is not a commitment to learning at all. It's just that whatever the UGC has told, they are applying it. And so I began to initiate a conference series asking architecture and design educational institutions to relook at how do we address aesthetic sense in an institutional setting. That how, without teaching, aesthetic sense can be developed. And I have been working on that, and I have been very, very successful in doing it. That in wherever places I have gone, with no teaching at all, I was able to awaken. I call it awakening aesthetic sense, not teaching. So awakening what is inherent in you needs to be developed, So I have been doing this, this Panima conference with the help of NIT Calicut Architecture Department and the IIA, Indian Institute of Architects Center in Calicut. Three of us have been trying to organize series of conferences where we are trying to get institutions to relook at that. But I think on the whole, in the last 3 years, I find it absolute failure, because after all the 3 years of this conference, not one institution has come forward to do anything about this, So I think I would now stop it here, because there's no point in, having a conference with nothing achieved, So that's the, and so the main thing is that, yes, ask me please.
The new education policy which is coming up, So do you think things are going to change with this new policy?
No, not at all. Not at all. New education policy is nothing but a copy of the old education policy, and some cosmetic changes have taken place. You see, they are also trying to Indianize without understanding what is to be a true Indian. I think the only illiterate people of this country are true Indians, because they are involved in creation of contextual knowledge. So unless we address creation of knowledge, there is no way we can reimagine education in any meaningful way. Because we are still thinking that, instead of the British made or the Western made books, you make the Indian made books. But what do you do with these books? You're only analyzing it, memorizing it. When biologically we are equipped to create knowledge, and why are we not, taking that into consideration and reimagine whole education, and also the latest cognitive science research, so many things are, being revealed that how is our brain functioning, how does it develop. So when you actually train a child to read somebody's books from childhood, you become a third-rate person. There is no other way you can do, because anyway you're reading somebody's work, whereas you're biologically equipped to create knowledge that is not being, not being acknowledged at all. And I think the whole issue of cognitive autonomy, if you don't understand and how cognitive process works, how the cognitive foundation is formed, this is not going to change. You see, one more thing I want to add is that this whole modern education, which is based on the Western paradigm, has never ever addressed creation of knowledge. So unless a non-Western country takes over this idea and do a very fresh research on how children learn, and I have actually done it in my last 30, 40 years of my research is on how children learn. What is beauty? How does it get developed? What is ethics? All these things has been it's almost like a tapas, It's a 30 years of very, very dedicated work that I have done. I have thousands of videos and images of children from which I have been able to decode the whole structure behind, how children create knowledge,
Okay. So there is a kind of focus on skill development these days. Even governments are giving kind of publicity on that. We need to have more skill. Do you think that skill without knowledge really is going to
You
do
see,
something?
if you look at it, they were till now producing cognitive labor, mind labor. That is what IITs also do, There's no difference. You're producing cognitive labor. Now they want body labor. That's skill labor means body labor. So they are still keeping these two things in a different way. One is cognitive labor, mind-based learning. Other one is body-based learning. Now, human beings don't learn like this at all. Human beings actually, it is in experience that both these things happen. When you engage with something, as you begin to do those things, both your skill develops and your knowledge develops. These are not two separate things. But in the modern context, we only want, servants and clones. So that is what modernity is all about. If you don't understand the whole modern crisis, which is to create human idiots out of human beings, they are doing it very, very successfully. And new education policy will also create new refined idiots. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. That's all. There's nothing much that it can do because it doesn't address a fundamental human faculty, which is to create knowledge.
Okay. So we are also focusing on artificial intelligence, metaverse. A lot of these things are being popularized these days. So in your comments.
See what is happening. I'll tell you. I have done an interesting study on this. See that you look at the parallel between human education and machine education. You find that both we have been applying the same method. You give input, and then there's an output. Whether it is human child or a human being or a machine, that is what it was happening. No, as an output is given, input is given, and then you ask certain questions, and here comes the output. Correct? No, same thing was happening in machine also. That you give input, and now the market forces, the people who control the market want intelligent machines, and machines that can think on its own, but they don't want human beings that can think on their own. Please note this. So, and what they have done is that they're all research to develop artificial intelligence based on how children learn and create knowledge. This is the paradox of modernity. At one level, you rely on children's and study them and develop artificial intelligence, which is actually to, again, demean the same children through your educational paradigm to dumb them down. So artificial intelligence is going to be extremely dangerous because it completely undermines humans' ability to create knowledge. These are two different things. So the tragedy is that they are developing artificial intelligence today by learning how children learn. This is the paradox. And I can actually very clearly, through my videos, through my proof, I can very clearly show you how this is going wrong. The whole research is going wrong in the West.
Okay. So traditional crafts, it's a kind of a lifestyle which has been, I mean, in your research also you have been telling about the traditional crafts.
Yeah.
So how is it going to like impact the educational segments? Like, can we use tools from the traditional crafts to help the
And
students in that sense?
no, I believe that there are two things. One is that my interest in traditional craft is to understand how knowledge is created and how aesthetic sense is formed. These are two areas that modern people have not addressed. That how, because we always tell them as illiterates and they don't know anything. Na? That is the usual idea of modern man. But when I went to rural tribal areas, I found that is not true at all. They are creating knowledge, and their whole cognitive paradigm is very different from ours. They actually totally rely on experience, and they rely on their own personal verification of information. So there is a very clear distinction between information and knowledge in illiterate communities, whereas in modern community we don't have this difference. No, for us information and knowledge is the same. you know Otherwise we will never call that we are learning knowledge from schools, because that's simply information, and you take a degree and you feel as if you have knowledge. This is not true at all. So my interest in rural tribal communities, there are two, three reasons. Number one is that I wanted to understand how knowledge is actually created. Second, and the more important thing, is that how they have been able to retain sustainability in their life for thousands of years, whereas for us, in the last 300, 400, 500 years, we have destroyed Earth beyond any possibility of recovery. So I think the lessons of indigenous communities is how to live sustainably and how to become a human being once again. But we are so arrogant that we think that we can, we still want to use their certain systems and do some repair work here. It's not possible at all. Because the mind that has created this drastic destruction to the world, the same mindset cannot solve it at all. Because it is the mindset that is creating destruction. Because the mindset of a modern man is fragmentary and compartmentalization. And of course, exclusion. So it's a default setting in the modern man also to look at others as inferior. That's a setting, mind setting. That's a worldview of a modern man, that he will look at others as inferior because he thinks he's educated, he thinks he's progressed, he's developed. All this terminology is put you on top internally. Whether you're actually that or not is a different question that can be asked. But your belief is that you are an educated person, you are progressed, you are developed, others are not. So naturally you have a superiority complex, without you knowing. So you will never be able to do anything worthwhile. So I don't think even this UN nonsense, some curriculum, some framework they have made for sustainability, absolute nonsense. None of that will work at all, because they are not at all taking into consideration certain fundamental facts. That you see, the difference is that indigenous communities are process-oriented communities, whereas modernity is product-oriented. And process-oriented means any object can solve a problem. Whereas in modernity, only a particular object can solve the problem. And also in tradition, this process orientation ensured that recycling is all the time happening. Whereas for us, recycling is it's a forced activity. It's an afterthought. Whereas indigenous communities, that is default. So there is a way of being on this, in this fragile earth, which has finite, resources, to live in a very, very wise manner, which I think we have lost completely. So
Sir, what would be the future for the generations to come in? What do you think? Where are
they are
we?
going to, pardon?
Say basically, where are we? Say moving to in that sense, like in education, in design, in other aspects. When you've been in the research, so you might have found something like this could be the future, or something like that.
No, you see, in the path that has been charted out by the modernity, the future is going to be extremely dangerous, extremely unhappy for young people. You see, I'll tell you one simple example. Modern people doesn't know even how to look after their own children. So many parenting workshops are happening, it's strange that a species cannot even know how to look at their children. This is a very new phenomena, that you look at any living species which needs assistance from somebody else to look after their children. And illiterate people never had a problem. It is only the highly educated, and the more you are educated, the more you do not know how to look after children. And whatever the West is promoting as parenting workshop is extremely detrimental to their development. Because you see, sensitivity is something, the last thing that they are thinking about. But they want to turn everything into language and everything into very tangible means. That's not the way to understand children. In the first 2 years, children don't speak at all. So how do you understand somebody who doesn't speak? Through your senses, through your sensitivity, through your intuition. That's not what modernity is trying to tell people. They are finding more and more mechanisms so that you can mechanically understand a child. You see, so the real bonding between mother and child is formed in the first 2-3 years, when there is no language at all. It's a physical bonding that happens, emotional bonding that happens, not through language. They don't tell you, I love you. They don't say that. So there is a deep connection that is made in the very, very young age when the child is not able to speak. They are extremely fragile, extremely beautiful at that time, That is the time you should make connection without your mind, without your language. But that is completely missing in modern, because modernity wants children to grow up fast so that they can speak, because they have lost the ability to connect with in any non-verbal way. So I think and this is going to be more and more parents are going to get alienated from their children. They will need more and more training how to look after children, and any training is detrimental. Let me tell you this. See, we are all again biologically equipped to take care. These are all biological factors. Nurturing is a biological faculty. It's not an intellectual. It's not something you have to learn through language and then apply. So unless we recover our biological beingness as a human being, there is no scope at all. There's no scope. And I don't think this modern lousy fellows will ever understand this, because they're so caught up in their own ego and their money making. This is the whole problem. You see, when profit is the most important thing, truth, science, nothing has value. Love has no value. Unless we put money in a lower category, truth is more important that, love is more important that, there is no way we are going to turn around and make any difference to this world. It's just a myth making we are doing now. All this, UN's, what is that? Environmental sustainability goals and all that is not going to reach anywhere. That's very sure.
So the only solution is going to be like you come back to the natural processes, and then say, don't put money over everything. And
absolutely. Become human beings, huh? Not we are not human beings at all today.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much for spending this much time and sharing your experiences. It is wonderful to spend some time with you, sir. Thank you.